Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the Intel 300 processor. It's quite possibly the weakest CPU of 2024 so far. With 2 cores and 4 threads, it will struggle in most modern games, as demonstrated in yesterday's review video. Sometimes it will produce respectable average frame rates, but it's let down by consistency. A dual core just isn't enough these days. This is the RTX 4080 Super, quite possibly the best GPU of 2024 so far. It's a gaming beast. Welcome to the ultimate bottleneck experience 3.0. Now obviously a pairing like this makes no sense, but I was curious to find out how much performance we'd be leaving on the table when we've got a completely mismatched configuration. The following games have been tested at 2160p or 4K, and although we've used and seen the benefits of frame generation in CPU limited scenarios before, I've kept it switched off today as this is all about pure performance, no tricks or upscaling involved. The gameplay on screen is of course from our cursed combo, and we'll start with Cyberpunk 2077. For some reason I had hoped that playing at 4K would help our CPU, maybe the GPU would become the bottleneck instead. How naive of me, of course. I knew that deep down, but one can hope. The processor I've used for comparative results is the Core i5 12600KF, a 10-core 16-thread chip that makes much more sense alongside the high-end RTX, and looking at the first results here, there is about a 15 FPS difference on average, which isn't that significant to be fair. The real problem is once again with the percentile lows. 2 cores and 4 threads will mean that there will be quite a few frame dips and drops, but having said that, this wasn't completely unplayable. There were certainly some off-putting moments whereby the frame rate dropped at the wrong time, but this is far from the worst result we got today. This brings us nicely on to Starfield. Now look, I'll admit it, I really like this game. I do still wonder why it runs so poorly on some hardware, but here, even our Intel 300 could manage over 30 FPS. With a 1 and 0.1% low of 14 and 2 respectively though, it doesn't exactly feel great. We saw a very nice 69 FPS with the i5, and as you can see the percentile numbers were improved as well. These are perhaps the more important figures to focus on. Of course this was always going to be the case, and I can't complain given the hardware we're using. If anything, it's just nice to see how far 2-core chips have come over the years. Dragon's Dogma 2 next, and this does have a few performance issues anyway, even when we're using a more powerful processor. The Intel 300 and RTX 4080 Super combo managed 32 frames per second today, with a 1% low of 12 and a 0.1% low of 7. All of the figures were at least doubled with the i5, but there were still some problems. I'm actually surprised the Intel 300 ran this one at all. The loading screen did freeze a couple of times, and I was sure a crash was imminent, but the plucky dual-core processor pushed on through and made it into the game. Again, there isn't much to say here, but I will compliment this processor on its ability to once again hit at least 30 FPS under what is extreme stress. Forza Horizon 5 up next at 2160p, of course, with the Extreme preset. I mentioned yesterday that this is usually a more GPU intensive game. That's not the case here, of course, but because it's not as fussy about the processor you use, we did see a half decent result from this one. Even the percentile lows were okay. The 0.1% low produced by the i5 was higher than the 300's average number, but this wasn't a terrible experience with the weaker CPU at all. The most noticeable issue was that after every few seconds of smooth gameplay, there would be a few seconds of slowdown before things picked up again. I'm not sure how noticeable that is in the footage, but it was certainly noticeable as I was playing. Grand Theft Auto 5 also ran pretty consistently with this combo at 4K. I was using the highest settings here with FXAA enabled and the advanced settings set to their respective maximum options. A very nice 69 FPS for the 300 CPU here, with 1 and 0.1% lows of 47 and 40. Interestingly, I also noticed some slowdown with the i5 in busier areas. I'm not talking about stutter or anything, but there is quite a large gap between the average and the 1% low, which reflects a pretty hefty performance drop in and around downtown Vinewood. This is certainly one of the better results for the 300, but this is the oldest game tested today, and for older games, in pairing with an entry-level graphics card, this chip would do okay a lot of the time. It just isn't worth it at its current price point here in the UK, which is about the same as the i3 12100F. At the time of upload, the i3 is almost £1 cheaper in fact on Amazon. To finalise, we have what I feel is another solid effort from the 300 dual-core CPU, and this time it hit almost 60 FPS with the 4080 Super in Red Dead Redemption 2. The percentile lows were okay, and none of the figures were reported as less than 30 FPS. I caused some carnage in and around Valentine, and the game felt consistent enough to be playable. Again, this doesn't mean much for real-world usage, as it's an unlikely pairing, but I couldn't move on without at least trying it. Overall, the results were pretty much as anticipated. I don't want to slander the Intel 300 CPU too much because despite its flaws, it does produce some pretty surprising results considering the core count, as I mentioned yesterday. Furthermore, there were scenarios where I saw the graphics card utilised a lot more than I was expecting in terms of a percentage reading. That's because of the high resolution, of course, the card had to work a bit more. That said, our CPU didn't really have it any easier in this case. At some point I'll try frame generation again with this processor and a 40 series card, as that will change things, but as for this one, well, I'll be bringing the 300 CPU out every so often to see how it handles newer game releases, but until then, it can have a well-earned rest. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.